first series, webinars we are doing on behalf of Indic Today. We will be today talking with noted upcoming author Ms. Sahana Vijay Kumar. This webinar is being done through Indic Today, which is a web media platform for Indic Academy. As many of you are aware, we have been running various platforms as well as various initiatives to encourage authors and to encourage people to write. It can be in form of scholarships, it's been in form of workshops, it's been in form of author promotion. Today's webinar is the author promotion. I would request everyone to visit www.indictoday.com to know more about all the various announcements and initiatives we are doing to increase authors in the Indic ecosystem. Sahana Vijay Kumar has written 3 books so far in the Kannada language, and her book Kashira will be releasing shortly in about 1 month's time, translated in English. I will ask Venkatesh to take from here and interview Ms. Sahana Vijay Kumar.
Thank you very much, Yogini. Namaste, everybody. Welcome to my first webinar on Indic Today as well. And welcome, Sahana ji. Welcome to all the attendees as well. I see around 20 people on board already. I see some familiar names as well. If any of you have seen me in real life earlier, you will find it difficult to recognize me. That's because of the haircut. You have to blame my wife for it. So I have been, no, I'm not the culprit there. Today, we're going to chat with Sahana ji. It's going to be a fairly informal conversation, though I'd like to impose a little bit of structure for the sake of it. To introduce Sahana ji, I got to know of this new name, Sahana Vijay Kumar, around 2018 when Kashira, her novel, got released, and it got some rare reviews from a lot of people I know, and I read quite a few of them, and it was on my reading list almost immediately. And then I have also read a recent novel, which is Avasana, that came out just earlier this year. I did a bit of research on her writing career, and I was quite intrigued because she has an amazing amount of productivity. She started writing in 2014 as a columnist in newspapers, and then every 2 years a novel comes out, and that to me is something very difficult. And I know that writing is not the only thing she does. She's not an academic, and she's a full-scale professional. So I think she has a day job, and she does this as well. And Kashira was unique because for a budding novelist who was new on the scene, it spread purely from the word of mouth. We did not have any massive ecosystem. Hopefully we'll have one with this kind of initiatives, but it was purely word of mouth, and it created quite a bit of sensation, and it helped that Sri S.L. Bhairappa did put in a lot of good words about it, and that made a lot of us take notice about this new author. Sahana ji is from Mysore. Okay, she's right now in Bangalore, the intellectual capital of India, as I like to put it. And let's start with a brief introduction of her background, her literary interests, influences, and what brought her to the world of letters, or Saraswata Loka, as we call it in Kannada. And then we will take up the other novels. So Sahana ji, over to you first. What actually brought you into the world of letters?
I think you have given a good amount of details already. I began columns in 2014, as you pointed out. And that was because of, I was always interested in current affairs. Though I did not write, I kept a watch and I saw how things were shaping up when the 2014 Lok Sabha elections were about to be held. And one day, Arvind Kejriwal crash landed in Modi's office. And that's when I wrote my first article on Kejriwal, actually, questioning him. So that was how it started. And that article got very good responses. The editor of the paper also told me that it was a very good writing. And then from there on, I started sending an article a week, mostly on current affairs. And I got a column eventually. Within 3-4 weeks, he happened to give me a column, Kannadi. And I wrote for about an year, and after which I happened to meet Dr. S.L. Bhairappa sir in one of the programs where I had to speak about the female protagonists in his novels. So that was for a very short period. I had only 15 minutes wherein I had to sum up. I took some important characters from his novels and then I spoke. And then I asked him if I could, I had this urge. I wanted to try out something of the sort of a novel, but I was not trained. I didn't understand the form, content, structure, literary nuances. But he was very kind enough because he said he was reading my articles and he felt those were good. So he is used to reading all the articles. He usually reads many newspapers every day. And then he said, yes, you can go ahead, let me validate. So I thought he is the best person if there's somebody that can validate and give a pass or a fail. So that's how it began. It was all of a sudden. The first one was a contemporary subject because I was not very much prepared. I did not have anything on mind. This was a very vague thought that was in me. And I ended up writing and then rewriting as per his guidelines. There were some changes required. And after that, he felt it was good to be published. And then I approached a publisher and he was happy. And that's how it began. So 2016 is when my first novel, Kshamai, came out.
Something interesting that strikes me is that typically the creative urge tends to catch people who have a arts or a humanities background, and you are not, and you are an engineer, right? By training,
yes,
at least.
Yes.
Okay. So it's an interesting trend because lately we've been having this, we can say Chetan Bhagat started it in a way, but that's not the way we want to go out here. But lately we've been having a lot of people, professional people coming into the creative writing domain. Now, where does this creative urge come from? Because columnist is a different thing, right? Commenting on current affairs and politics is a entirely different thing. But writing a novel is totally a different game. And where does that creative urge come to you? I'm saying because how did you even get that motivation to write that to a novel?
When I was writing columns, I always felt it difficult to stop at the the said limit of words. For example, you cannot exceed 750 words. What would happen to me is I would pick up a topic, and the minute it would go into a creative mode, I would know that I'm running out of space now. I cannot write more. So I started feeling that difficulty. I started experiencing it after, say, 4 or 5 months, and it started becoming very monotonous for me. Anything creative, because you have to, in columns, you have to give a good background of it before you start. It cannot be a jump start. You give that and you want to take your own approach, and then you have to stop it. So this bringing it to an abrupt end started happening, and then I realized this might become difficult for me going forward. And I have written a few poems. I don't know, you might not even want to call them poems, but I used to do some creative writing in my school and college days. And so I had this urge in me. And because you mentioned our industry where there's a lot of scope to do things creatively, even in your own profession. So after I started writing, I realized that my work is going in a different way. I mean, it always was. The tendency of trying to do it in a unique way was always there. So if we look at our lives, I think it's not literature. You can make sure that you are a creative person when you look at how we are doing your day-to-day chores also. So that was how I found out. I could not continue writing columns. I wouldn't have been able to, I think.
A wise decision, because we need more writers. novelists rather than columnists. What were the creative literary influences that what did you read, or what made you, what, you know, in your formative years at least, what did you read and who actually influenced you in terms of writing? What is it that you admire about them? Would you be able to let us know what you feel about it?
Yeah, to be very honest, I'm still in my formative years. I mean, I have not actually begun. I've not actually crossed the phase where I can quote so many, authors and say these are the influences. But I read at random. In Kannada, it was Bhairappa sir. Obviously, every Kannadiga who wants to read serious literature. But even that was not very organized, because there is a systematic way of reading. It's not just reading the story. There's the technique you need to understand. There's the philosophy. There's the human psychology. There are so many elements, especially Bhairappa sir's books. So it was all very informal reading. I would pick up Khalid Hosseini. I would pick up anybody and just read for the sake of it. But yes, there was a plan to do some serious reading after getting out of my work, or whenever I would find spare time, I would get into serious reading. Mostly it was Bhairappa sirs in Kannada.
Coming to Kashira, it's a complex subject and a big kind of a novel to take up in first place, because one of the things is that the scope and complexity of the subject is quite huge. In a way, it reminds me of what Sri Bhairappa did with Avarana, take up a current historical very burning issue and try to look for truth in that. For me, I find it as a challenging subject, mainly because of two issues. One is that when you look at it sheerly in terms of literary format of a novel, when you choose a subject like this, which is concerned with Kashmir, the Pandit exodus, and then the ongoing situation there, objectively, you cannot tamper with the truth. Even for the form of literary merits. And it's a difficult job to manage both. What actually made you to choose this particular subject?
See, I was always looking at the current affairs, as I told you. I was very interested. When I was reading the life of Adi Shankaracharya, I noticed that he had traveled to Kashmir. There was this Sarvagnya Pitha, and Kashmir has a very rich history. So that intrigued me. And this 370 wouldn't go. Every now and then we saw what 370 was causing. And the other thing that I notice is we are very bad at record keeping. We are not meticulous. We have nothing, and tracing things are very difficult. For example, the only chronicle in India is Rajatarangini, written by Kalhana. And you will not believe that the Hungarian philosopher Aurel Stein got the copy of Rajatarangini with two siblings. What had happened is there was a dispute in the property divide, and both the brothers had decided to tear the Kalhana Rajatarangini also into half. So each half was with each brother. Aurel Stein had to convince both of them, get it pieced together, and it was in Sharda script. So he got it transliterated into Devanagari script, from which he translated it into English. So this is the state of our history. And you know what the history books are doing. I think we had about 4.5 pages on Mughal dynasty and 1 paragraph on Vijayanagara Empire. So such is the state of affairs. And this connect is completely lost. When I read that Shankaracharya went from here to there, so it was like we don't know anything about Kashmir now. We hardly knew that the 1990 thing happened, and we hardly realized what had happened. The entire community was forced to flee the land. So that intrigued me, and I started getting into the details. As you mentioned, it is very complex. You could not leave the political aspect behind, because there's a cascading effect. If you see in the case of Kashmir, after its creation, and there's a good part of history where things happen and it comes to a closure, after which new things start resuming. There's a new look over that it gets. But in the case of Kashmir, it is so unfortunate. The cascading effect only caused its deterioration decade by decade. So after the Dogra, Hari Singh, the accession was a mess. Pakistan intruded. The way we handled it was a bigger mess. We took it to the United Nations. We called a truce unnecessarily. We lost important divisions of Kashmir, which are now called Pak-occupied Kashmir. So we let that go, and did it stop there? No. What happened was the petrodollars started playing a huge role. People started Islamizing. Funds came in. They again started intruding in the affairs of Kashmir, and 80s and 90s were horrible. What happened in 90s eventually was January 19th, 1990, the Kashmiri Hindu community was forced to flee that land. So what was complex or what was difficult for me was, which phase do you focus on? You were talking about the structure. So before I traveled to Kashmir, I had a different storyline on my mind.
Let me stop you at that moment for a moment. It's very interesting that within the novel, there comes a conversation that's happening on a TV debate, actually, between two characters, where this lady, this very secular lady, suddenly challenges the other person who's very knowledgeable on history and all of that. Have you traveled to Kashmir? Have you been there? And suddenly, it is something fundamental snaps into place at that point of time. And that's actually a question that it struck me as a reader as well. I talk about Kashmir. I have Kashmiri Pandits as my friends, and I have worked with Kashmiri Muslims, friends, colleagues, and others. And I comment about it. I've read about it, but I have not gone there.
No, I also checked with a few journalist friends, co-columnists. Nobody had been to that place. It was all taken from the other sources, the internet articles on whatever sources were available.
So the protagonist in the novel, he travels to Kashmir, and it almost seems like a journey replicated in real life by the author. So what can you share about that? That's a very interesting thing, because at this, it takes a lot of guts to do that, and go and see something for yourself and experience it for yourself.
Yeah. So many have asked me if I have taken the course that Narendra in that takes. It's not actually possible, and it is true to some extent. If you have noticed, Narendra cannot move out. He cannot move around a lot. He cannot visit places. There's always a restriction, a confinement. So that was experienced by me as well. But then talking to those many people so candidly was definitely not possible. We were scared. Thankfully, my friends who accompanied me, Rahul Trakru and Vivek Sinhaji, they did not let me get scared. They never told me, even if there was a very sensitive situation, they would just keep calm and we would move. After we passed through, they would say there was a very big crowd or things could have gone wrong there. Because 370 was still there, it was not yet abrogated. And there is a lot of stone pelting. The conditions can suddenly turn hostile, and internet connections are gone, and sometimes we plan our visits and they get rescheduled because of curfew suddenly imposed, and we get to know those roads are blocked. So it has happened that we have gone without food for some days in the afternoon. We wouldn't get time, we would get stuck talking to people, but I'm extremely thankful to them because they were with me from the word go after I landed there. and they took me around to all the places. And I didn't stay at a Pandit's place as Narendra does in the novel. I stayed in a hotel, and only for one day I stayed with one of a friend in Sheikhpura settlement, that's in Badgaon district. And it was scary. I mean, we couldn't move around very freely, and there was always this. They were very watchful about what was happening. But yes, so as much as the people haunted me, as much as I felt bad for the people, the place itself, makes you feel so desolate after you've been there and you have seen what has happened to it. So after that, that experience changed my plot actually. So what I rethought or what happened to me is, if I write a cool story, because if you read Kalhana's Rajatarangini, you have so many events, so many kings, the stories of kings. It's very easy to weave something very cool that can bring tears to your eyes. That's all fine. But how do I bring in the political, the social, and the religious aspects? The religious one is the main culprit. The predatory religion called Islam, its effects are direct there. So you were talking about truth. Now, if I don't write all these, if I fail to give that picture, at least try to put as comprehensively as the structure can hold, the subject can hold, then what justice do I do to myself? Because I went through a lot of pain when I was reading through, when I had been there, and even after coming back. So it was not a very joyful experience for me.
I'm a firm believer in the Rasadhwani theory of criticism, because that's the only thing that I understand. Okay, one thing that struck me was how the importance of a man, one of the characters in your thing, kinds of acts like a symbol for the importance of the civilization as a whole, to safeguard itself. It's not as if and that kind of resounds again and again. Is that now, as a woman, how is it that you are able to bring the male characters and their internal turmoil, the challenge to masculinity that happens when, one is put through such experiences, being able to safeguard our daughters, our wives, our property, that's the basic masculine instinct, and one is not able to do that. It is impotence in a way. So how is it that you're able to put that in that perspective? Because the prevailing theory is that women can write about women and men can write about men only. So and feminists in particular say that only women can write about women. So that was an interesting thing for me. Would you share something about the male characters in your some insight into how you approach those?
Sure. So when I read and when I saw how they are living there as a family, Venkatesh, you will not believe, they are given a settlement. They call it a settlement with around 250 houses and around 1,000 people there.
This is in Jammu, or is it in
Kashmir? Jammu is
okay.
Pathetic. The Jagti settlement is pathetic. That's another story. I visited Jammu while I was coming back. In Kashmir, they told me that in 2008, there was a rehabilitation program, and they started constructing these houses. And in a house, 3 to 4 families were supposed to stay, sharing a single bathroom. How they are and how they were initially, because I visited 3-4 years ago, but when they had begun, they told me their tribulations and how they felt. There used to be fight for having to use a bathroom, getting ready to go to office and school. So when you study a subject, I think you collectively look at every character. It's not a male or a female when you are reading or writing something, because our philosophy, I don't know, these feminisms and these ideologies, these movements are not about life, are not about the true philosophy, which is the value system that drives us. So when I look at it collectively as a family. First, it is the entire state, the community, the family, and then each individual within. So if you look at Aarti's monologue there, you know that nobody spoke that out to me. But when the entire family is put into a 8 by 8 tent or a 9 by 9 tent, what happens to newlywed couple? So when I discussed, after having written, when I brought this point out to my friend, he was very happy. He said nobody had observed this. His name, I don't recall his name, sorry, but he said nobody had observed this. I'm very grateful that you brought this point up because people happen to ignore. There was a decline in their population because they did not have private life, which is very important. And a lot of divorces happened because they could not get along with each other. So a man's importance also comes in that chapter. I think that was what you were mentioning when Aarti says, yeah. So, I mean, if you are a keen observer, if you can sense, I think you should be easily able to grasp. Otherwise, what else are you doing? I'm not looking just at the numbers. I'm not looking at what Hari Singh did, what Nehru did, what Gandhiji did not do, and what Sardar Patel did extremely well. It's not just that. How are the families now paying the price, and what is it? In how many different ways? I think it definitely bothered me a lot. Otherwise, it would have missed my attention.
The structure of your novel, what struck me was that you have a very visual way of looking at it, and it's almost as if this was visualized as a movie in a sense, in terms of how you structure the novel. So if I might say, when the novel opens with a very grand scene of Adi Shankara, ascending the Sarvagna Pita, and then there is the other end when your emotions touch the rock bottom, when your own neighbors betray you, and your daughter gets murdered raped and murdered on the street, and that plaintive cry for justice, mega chinsaf, that you put into the character's mouth. And it never happens. The government, the police, and the whole apparatus of the Indian state is there, and yet you're not able to deliver justice, and you put them at the mercy of the people who did them injustice, and so that's kind of the rock bottom. But yet, you seem to end your novel on a note of optimism, where there is a hope of civilizational rejuvenation and reclamation. Now, did you actually see that in the Kashmiri Pandit community? Some people say that the Pandits don't want to go back. When you talk to people, and what did you feel?
Those that are living there are living for their own reasons. Some don't want to leave the country, their native place. They just don't want to come back. Some have gone back after they've got jobs. But those who don't want to go back now is for a valid reason. We are seeing what is happening there, even now. So I think the introspection should happen not for the Pandit community, but with the others. So there's one person, Riaz Wani, whom I've acknowledged in the book also, who comes from the Kashmiri Muslim family. He was very honest when he said, it's a mistake. We need to correct it and we need to get those people back. So if you are seeing any shade of optimism, it's from those people. So many are there who want to bring these people back and who wants to correct and who did not participate in the 1990 thing. This person's family, parents had decided they would not go to the mosque that day. And they said, we just cannot be a part of this, so let us not go. So when that boy, he's a young man now, when he says that, it definitely triggers some hope, isn't it? Because when you look at their philosophy, there is no place for tarka or logic. They just have to listen to somebody who's a mediator. They just have to listen to what is being told. Now, this is good, this is bad. They cannot analyze, they cannot introspect. Therefore, they cannot come up to different point of view. They cannot develop their own perceptions, etc. So there definitely that's a very difficult and a very big change, but I saw it in some of them at least.
I'm ambivalent on this point because a very good young friend of mine, a doctor himself, uh, he actually related one of his own self experience when he went to Srinagar on a visit, and when coming back, he goes to the airport cafe, gets a coffee, and then speaks in Kashmiri, and the person at the other end smiles and gives it back and says, and gives back the change. And then he says, this guy says, thank you. And he says, no, you are our guest.
Correct. Correct.
Okay. And it's a real life experience.
Correct.
Being a guest in one's own house is not a good feeling. So, so do people want to go back? I'm not so sure. Okay, but the other point that the underlying theme of the novel seems to be that it's not the Pandit's responsibility to get back Kashmir, but it is the responsibility of the civilization as a whole to go and reclaim that space back to where it belongs. So I remain hopeful that that's going to happen. It's a little bit unfortunate, it might have triggered a lot of things since rewinding all of those unfortunate incidents when, we recently just heard of Ajay Pandita, the Sarpanch being killed in Kashmir. So do you see reason for hope?
Unless we are, I saw Sushil Panditji tweet 2 days ago. We need arms, we need to be trained. I mean, that's the only hope. Truly, unless your Kshatriya is revived, there is no hope. Your Kshatriya has to be revived in some way. You keep saying Ekam Sat Vipra Bahudha Vadanti, you keep saying Sarva Dharma Samabhava, it won't help because the philosophy is different. They do not consider we as equal to them. So what is the point in we trying to spread the message of tolerance? We keep saying secularism. One important thing is what Kashmiriyat did to Kashmir is what secularism will do to this country. So I think without Kshatriya, there is no hope.
On that note, when is your English translation coming up? So any details that you can share about when it will be out? The lockdown might have affected the timelines a bit.
Correct. That's what has happened. It was all ready. I think in a couple of weeks from now, 3 to 4 weeks from now, it should be ready. Garuda Prakasham has taken up the publishing. So 4 weeks from now is when we can start pre-ordering, I believe.
What about other languages?
Marathi is almost, I think more than half is done. Hindi is complete. It's with the publisher.
So to the whole audience, this amazing novel is going to be in English, Hindi, and Marathi so soon. So if you cannot read Kannada, you do not be disappointed. It's going to be coming in other languages soon. Yogini, any questions at this point of time that you would like to take? I would, maybe time box it to 5 minutes and then go on to Avasana.
I think we can have another 5 minutes or so for her next book, Avasana, and we'll take questions after that.
Okay. Actually, one of the things that I did was Kashira was always on my list, but then when I looked up when I was trying to order Kashira, I saw that there was another book out, and so I ordered Avasana, and I'm glad I did that. This is again a very I would say difficult novel for me to read because one of the things is that today our elders have kind of become a burden to us. at times. The family system is unable to take control of it, and we are not able to manage it better. Maybe the modern life doesn't allow for it. And at the same time, when we talk about death, it's you put in a very meaningful sentence in your introduction. Death is not just biological. The disdain, the hate from one's own blood that people get is also death in a perhaps a delayed manner, slow manner. So, what prompted you to choose this particular subject? After Kashira, that's totally at a civilizational level, and this is a deeply personal issue.
Yeah, as you said, old age homes which weren't there earlier have now started cropping up, and if you just get inside and hear or listen to the stories, you get to know what the family system or the values have declined to. So that was one thing that intrigued me. And then the quest for father. So that's Kamathipura, the red light area. So what happens to the children? What happens to the offspring is something that was bothering me. And then the beauty of Indian religious places is there is an underlying philosophy. For example, Pandharpura is known for its Mata Pitru Bhakti. Now that philosophy is just not in theory. It actually propounds certain values which we inculcate in our lives, and therefore we are connected to temples. Therefore we are so religious. It's not a theory somebody teaches you. So when I discovered that connect, it simply, brought me to that story where Kamathipura to Pandharpura, and then the story where it happens, the Solapura to Pandharpura. So the two protagonists are doing different things, since you've already read. So one is looking for a father and he respects all the elders that he sees, and the other one has his own reasons for developing a dislike. And it goes to a very great extent when he at a point thinks that he's not worth living anymore. His father should not be. So this is what is happening. So after this book, many people reached out to me and said, this is what is exactly happening in my house. This is how my son is behaving with me right now, or this is how my daughter has been treating me or my husband. So this is a very common problem, and many people related to it.
One thing that struck me is in your portrayal of Kamathipura and its the usual narrative of them being exploited women, and and having no other option except this, and being forced into the trade. You're quite objective and ruthless about that, destroying that myth as such. What makes human nature, people want to live on the edge of the society? Is it just plain laziness at times, or I don't know? It's a very complex question.
Yes, I also went with the notion, as you said, that probably all of them are being exploited. At least that's what the narrative is, that the feminists build up, which is not the case. Unfortunately, many are very reluctant when they are initially introduced, which is very obvious. But after a period, they get used to it and they don't want to come out of it. So I have met many people who have tried to bring these people from the clutches of the place, and they still want to go back. Laziness is there, we have to admit. That is a very easy way of making money, and there are other things that makes them feel comfortable. The way they are away from their families. Some of them go to their native places once a year, and they have their own group. There is a sort of mafia where there are brokers, agents who bring people to them, and because of which there are Kamathipuras outside Kamathipuras in very posh localities. I and you won't believe when we see certain people on the streets who are doing this business in a much, much a grand way. So it's nothing, no more the pathetic state, or we shouldn't be claiming that they're all being exploited. It's not true now.
I also see this. You actually referred to it earlier. The the we all know the story of Pundalika, right? Associated with Pandharpur. He asks Vitoba himself to wait because he's attending to his parents, and and that's how Vitala ends up standing on a brick, and here you have kind of a Pundalika going in search of parents to serve, as such. I'm saying with no biological parents to speak of, and that's a character that brings out, and it's a very sharp contrast with the other side out there. I tend to think, is that real? I'm saying. Does a grown adult still feel that urge to have parents? Is that something that people experience? Because that's something that I couldn't readily relate to. And where does this character come from?
The process of, see, one thing that his mother does is she keeps him away. What usually they do is they send off their children to their native places. Their relatives or mothers take care of, else they grow in a very, very disturbed environment where, I have given it, subtly I have mentioned what happens. The children lay in the same corner of the room when they carry on with their business. So those are two extremes. Here is a mother who wants her son to grow well, get educated, and still she tries to cut him off from him, at the same time giving him that exposure. So what happens to such a child who tries to get a family, and the process of him growing up, he goes into an ashram where, these values are, of course, if he was growing up with some kids, that also comes. They turn up being dons eventually. But this guy goes into an ashram with all these details, all these people grooming him. I think that's where he develops that craving. And there are people who have lost their parents very early, and they tend to respect whenever they see a very old gentleman or a lady. They see their father and mothers. I have seen that happening.
I think we have a few questions coming in. Yogini, I think we could start with a couple of questions from the audience. Is that fine?
Yeah, I think go ahead and you can read out the questions and then she can respond.
Yeah, one question from Medini. She asks, after the 370 now is a thing of history. It's gone. Okay, does this bring out a positive change in the situation? Because when you wrote the novel, it was still something, an insurmountable block. It seems something now. It seems it was more of a mental block. But do you think it would bring out real change in terms of the situation? What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, there will be change. I think it will be gradual, and we have to understand that it's not going to be overnight. You just can't see miracles happening. The greatest advantage is the constitutional block is gone. Now we have a hand in the administration, and every change has to be brought with the help of the law of the land. So I think with that changing, yes, change will be there eventually, but it will take time. It's very scary because we saw what happened 2 days ago with Ajay Pandita. So it's not going to happen overnight.
One more question is, how was your response to your book from the public? Did you get, what kind of feedback you got? How have your interactions been with your readers? I think probably as a novelist, when your novel is successful, you tend to be happy, of course. But then beyond that, how did that help you?
Yeah, what happened was, after the first print did not have any bibliography. It has a brochure, if you have noticed, where I've listed out all the source documents. after the first version, many people started emailing me asking me the books, names of the books, because some come as a part of the structure of the novel, where in the debate, the protagonist happens to call them out. And they started asking me for the source material, which actually made me happy. And then the second print onwards, we decided, the publisher also okayed, and then we are giving this brochure with a list of books. And people are reading, and some of them are very studious and they come up with questions, and then I point it out. And that was the most important thing, because we need to start reading, we need to start going back to the source documents and try to understand where this is originating from. So that was the best part. Even otherwise, people have been very appreciative of the book, and many have considered this a textbook, to be very honest. So a lady, 81-year-old from a Vridhashram, called me and she insisted I meet her. I went and she had marked with a red ink. Some places she had doubts, she had questions. She said, "I'm glad I lived to read the account of Kashmir." I mean, such comments really made me happy.
The question that many want to ask is, with novel being successful, especially Canada has a literary world is strongly divided into the seculars and the communals. And it's hard to be just a literary critic at times. And so you must have had your share of brickbats as well. So did any come your way? And if it did, how do you deal with it?
No, nothing came my way directly, but I heard from other sources that this was not a very great work of art, is what somebody condemned or complained. That so that was what, nothing happened directly, so I don't know, and I did not have to tackle at all. I am very much absorbed in what I'm doing, so I'm just going on.
One thing that I want to ask you again is, I come back to this, something you've been writing, almost one every 2 years. So that's a prodigious amount of productivity, according to me. I'm saying, so how do you, what is your creative process? Do you just take time off work and just go away and shut yourself somewhere? How does it work for you?
I'm not active on social media at all. That saves a lot of time. WhatsApp, the other things, I don't hardly open them. So only when the book is out for a few days, I'm around, and then I'm gone. So that does the trick for me. And this 2 years once thing is not deliberate. It just happened. Kashmir was a very important subject for me. I tried to fit it into my columns. It didn't happen. I didn't know how to write Islam in separate chapters. It would be difficult. So Kashmir was bound to happen. And Afsana, because Kashmir, it kind of fatigued me. I was just trying to come out of it because it was just happening always. And so Afsana was there, and it also happened. And I have a lot of time apart from work because I don't do anything else. I social media, no. I think that is what I would attribute it to.
Are you writing something right now?
No, nothing as of now.
Okay, so you're taking a break as such.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, Sanaji, thank you very much for giving your time. I think the lesson over here that maybe we should reduce our social media consumption. A lot of our viewers for today have come from the social media channel. Listen to you. So I don't know if I should say that it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I definitely, I agree that for creative juices to flow and to flow consistently, probably a reduced social media presence might help many others. I think the need of the hour definitely is to have 1,000 writers. And I would urge all the people who are attending to go look at our announcements. We have recently announced workshops, writing workshops. So if you have in you to be a writer, please go ahead and sign up and take some this webinars or teaching assignments so that you can learn how to write. With that, We shall end today's webinars. Please do look out for future announcements. We'll be shortly announcing the next webinars. We will try and have webinars every fortnight from here onwards on Indic Today. Thank you for supporting Indic Academy and Indic Today. Thank you very much. Namaste.
Thank you, Veena ji. Thanks, Venkatesh.
Thank you.